I thought I would go through a few basics of using SketchyPhysics, and in particular some of the oddities of SketchyPhysics joints. So this is primarily about how joints interact with solids and how to make a solid that has two other solids attached to it by means of a joint. I'm only going to use the hinge joint, although I suspect that the characteristics here are going to follow for everything. So first off, we're going to make a solid. This is going to be a block here, like this. Now, one thing about this block is that if we, having made it, if we run SketchyPhysics, then it falls like that. So it's subject to gravity. The thing is that if we were to make say a rectangle like this, and then run SketchyPhysics, the rectangle doesn't move. What if we were to make it three-dimensional? Then what happens? Same thing. What if we were to select all connected and make it into a group? So now it's a group. Hit it again, and now they fall. So SketchyPhysics solids are groups, grouped objects of, or rather objects made of grouped geometries. Alright, so I'm going to put a floor here. This is a special case object that doesn't fall. Then we start SketchyPhysics, and now you can use the hand to manipulate this group and move it around, and in fact you can use it to push other objects around. It will follow the same kinetic energy transfer that a regular SketchyPhysics object made from one of these things here will follow. So that's good. That gives us some flexibility with making an object. Okay, so next we want to put in let me get rid of that, make a joint. And so this is a hinge. I'm going to do that. So now we have a hinge. There it is. And if I run SketchyPhysics now, this hinge doesn't go anywhere. It's a static object. So we'll next make a block like that. The block falls. That's good. Now we're going to use this joint connector. I'll select the joint. I'll press Control, connect it to the block there, and we'll run it. And now, as you can see, the block is attached to the hinge. Whoops. Stretch the joint too far. The block is attached to the hinge, and we'll do things like this. The block is not static, but it's connected to a hinge that's static. That is, this hinge is unable to move. Let's make another block. I'll make one here. One block falls and the other one moves. What if I were to connect the joint to the second block? Then we run it, and they'll both rotate around the hinge, and they interact with each other. They will transfer kinetic energy one to the other. What if I wanted to have these two blocks connected by means of a hinge and have the entire assembly, hinge and two blocks, be able to move around? Is there a way to do that? So let's try joining two blocks together by means of a hinge so they can rotate around each other. First I'll make a rather arbitrary block here. So that's one solid block. I'll make a second one there by using the copy command. So now if we run SketchyPhysics, then these blocks run into each other. They transfer kinetic energy toward one another. So now I'm going to put a joint here on this corner. This joint's actually not attached to any of the blocks. It is an immovable object. It turns out that's not static. It's an object whose SketchyPhysics state is static ignore. So things can pass through it and it won't move around. Alright. One way to attach this hinge to a block is to take the block and open it up, edit the group. Then I'll take my hinge, I'll put it on the corner here, I'll orient it, close the group, run the simulation, and now this thing moves around. You'll notice that here the outline that borders the this block is tight with the block. The outline here extends beyond the block and encompasses the hinge as well, and actually it's that outline, as you can see, that's running into things. And so I've already changed the properties of this block as a SketchyPhysics object. The other thing that's kind of odd, let's see if we can see that, there we go, is you can see here there's a little bit of the block that is extending outwards. That's not solid. So already the two of the grouped block plus joint is a little bit weird. Let's see, I'll move this upwards a little bit. I'll take my joint connector and I want to connect the joint here to this block. You'll notice that when I clicked on the joint I kind of missed, and it looks like I'm selecting the entire block plus joint. So that's not going to work. I actually need to hit the joint so only the joint is highlighted. Then hit Control, add this to it. Now we run the simulation. And this rotates around the hinge, but it also goes straight through the block that hosts the hinge. So it's like this block has suddenly become immaterial. It's also inherited the ignore characteristic that goes with the hinge itself. But oddly enough, this block isn't actually entirely immaterial. If we were to make a third block that's not part of this complex here with the joint, and then we run the simulation, this block interacts with both there and there. So it's only when these two blocks here have a relationship with the, by means of a joint that's part of this group, that the jointed group object becomes immaterial, becomes ignore, but only with respect to the jointed companion, but not with respect to a third block that's not part of this complex. This block interacts with both. So that's good to know, but I'd like for these two to rotate around this hinge, and I would like them to also be stopped by each other. It's kind of unrealistic otherwise. And so how do I achieve that? I'm going to make one block here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 of these identical blocks. Run the simulation. They apparently will run into each other. So what I want is a joint here. Let's see. So as before, I'll place a joint there, I'm going to additionally select this one, and I'll make it into a group. Let's see what happens now. Is this still working? Yes. It's got a weird physics though to it. As you can see, it doesn't quite know where it begins and ends, and its balance is off. I really dislike that. There must be some other way to do this. Let's explode the group, and we're going to get rid of that joint. So what I found is this. I can make a... Here we go. Here's a little square. I'm going to make this square into well, let's see now. Select all parts of the square. I'm going to make it into a group. So now this is a grouped object. I'll edit the group, and now I'll put a hinge on it. So this hinge joint here is part of a group with this square, not a three-dimensional object, although I could have done it easily enough that way as well. But whoa, I'm pretty sure that the joint as it is still does not interact with other things. It doesn't hit them and move them around. It's still immaterial, even though it's subject to gravity. Alright, so I'm going to move this complex now. I'll move it over on top of there at that corner. I'm going to join it. So again, I have to be sure when I select this that I'm not selecting this rectangle. I'm only selecting the hinge. There. I'm going to attach it to both of these. Now we run the simulation. This moves along independently. These things move along. But the real question is, do they... Come on, flip over. When they rotate, do they hit each other? And it turns out, well, there it is. There. They do not pass through one another, nor do they pass through other objects. So this is closer, or this is exactly what I'm looking for, is two blocks that are jointed to form an articulated arm, which interact with other things physically, and also interact with each other physically. They will not pass through each other as they do when you add one joint to another. When you add a joint to an exploded object, or rather an edited group.